Charles Whitaker adjusted his Rolex as the Tesla rolled to a silent stop in front of the faded brick building. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. Graffiti scarred the walls, a broken tricycle lay abandoned near the steps, and the scent of engine oil mixed with something far more tired: poverty. He climbed out, shoes clicking against the cracked sidewalk. His suit was pristine. His purpose was simple: rent, apartment 4B, 2 weeks overdue. He didn't knock politely. He pounded. No answer. He pounded again. Then, creak. The door eased open just enough for him to see inside. Dim light filtered through torn blinds. And there she was. A little black girl, maybe 10, slouched at an ancient sewing machine. Her hands were wrapped in what looked like tissue and electrical tape. Blood had soaked through. Her back hunched, face blank, eyes rimmed in purple shadows. But her voice didn't shake. "My mother's sleeping," she said, her tone calm. "Can I help you with something?" Charles blinked. I'm here for the rent." She didn't flinch, just reached for the sewing pedal and stopped the needle mid-thread. "Mom said we're behind. I'm finishing these dresses for Miss Alma. She pays fast." The air smelled like old cloth and iron steam. Piles of fabric surrounded her, bright, hopeful colors in a room that had no light. Charles stepped inside, uninvited. It felt like trespassing on sacred ground. "You're, what, 10?" he asked, voice uneasy. She looked up. "I'm 11 in July." Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted one off the machine. A tiny fingerprint smeared blood across the cloth. Still, she pressed it flat. Neat. Controlled. Charles shifted. "Your mom know I'm here?" "She's not waking up much today." A hacking cough exploded from the back room. Charles turned, startled. The girl didn't even flinch, just glanced that way, then looked back at him. "It happens more now. She needs rest." His mouth opened, but no words came out. Not about the rent. Not about eviction. The little girl stood, slowly. She walked to a corner shelf, pulled a wrinkled envelope from between 2 folded shirts, and brought it to him. "It's half," she said. "I'll have the rest by Saturday." He stared at the envelope in his hand. It was soft from being held too long, damp at the edges. "You're sewing all these to pay me?" "To keep the lights on," she replied. The sewing machine creaked behind her, its motor still warm. Her eyes met his again. They weren't scared. They weren't begging. They were exhausted, but proud. "I'm Zoe," she added. "Zoe Williams." Charles couldn't respond. He just nodded and turned to leave. As he stepped out into the afternoon heat, the image burned in his head. A little black girl, wounded hands, surrounded by colors, holding up her home with thread. In that moment, his buildings weren't investments anymore. They were people, and she was the first one to make him see it. The sound of the sewing machine returned before the door even shut behind Charles. Zoe didn't pause to watch him go. She just pressed the pedal and picked up where she left off, the needle dancing through fabric like it had a deadline breathing down its neck. Inside the apartment, the walls were stained with years of silence. Paint peeled like old memories, and the fridge made a soft clicking noise every time the motor struggled to stay alive. She reached for a new spool of thread, her fingers moving carefully around the blisters hidden under the bandages. The light above her flickered once, then steadied. She didn't look up. She was used to the flickering. In the back room, her mother coughed again, this time longer, rougher. Zoe glanced toward the door but didn't stop sewing. 3 more dresses, she whispered to herself. Then I can get the meds. A pile of finished garments sat neatly folded beside her. Bright blues, sunset reds, soft yellows. Every piece ironed, tagged, and tied with string. It looked like joy had been trapped in fabric. She reached for a water bottle beside her and took a small sip. Then she wiped the mouth of the bottle with her sleeve before setting it back down. Her mother might need it later. She moved the sewing pedal again. Across the hallway, someone slammed a door. Laughter echoed from a neighboring unit. But Zoe didn't look. Her world was smaller than the building. It was thread, needles, fabric, medicine. That was all. A loud groan from the bedroom broke her focus. Zoe stood quickly and rushed in. The room was dim, only one lamp on the nightstand, casting a circle of light across a frail woman's face. Elaine Williams lay on her side, sheets damp with sweat, skin pale against the pillow. Zoe leaned in. "Mom, you need water." Elaine stirred, barely. "I finished the green dress," Zoe added softly. "Miss Alma's gonna love it." Her mother tried to speak, but coughed instead. Zoe held the bottle to her lips and waited as she took a few sips. Then she wiped her mouth gently with the corner of the blanket and whispered, "Rest now. I've got it handled." Elaine reached weakly for her daughter's hand. Zoe let her fingers stay there just long enough for her mom to feel them, then pulled away. She walked back to the sewing machine. A text buzzed on a phone screen. It was Miss Alma. "Can you bring the dresses by tomorrow morning? Got another client, too." Zoe typed fast. "Yes, ma'am. We'll finish tonight." Her thumb hesitated, then added, "Sorry for the bloodstains on the inside seam. I'll redo it, if needed." The message sent. She rubbed her temples with her knuckles, then stared at the pile. The room swayed slightly, but she shook it off. Out the window, she could see across the cracked street. A Tesla turned the corner, heading away. She watched it disappear. Zoe didn't know what billionaires saw when they looked at buildings like hers, but she knew what she saw. Every stain on the wall had a story. Every chipped tile was time lost. Every dress she sewed was one more thread keeping her family above water. She returned to the machine. The needle clicked into motion again, and her hands kept moving. Inside her chest, there was no space for fear, only deadlines. Only survival. And the kind of strength a 10-year-old should never have to carry alone. 2 days later, Charles was halfway through a meeting with his investors when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Boston area code. He almost ignored it. Then something tugged at him. He stepped out of the conference room. "Mr. Whitaker?" A woman's voice. Calm. Clinical. "This is Mercy Hospital. You've been listed as an emergency contact for a patient named Elaine Williams." He froze. What?" "Her daughter Zoe gave us your number. We need an adult present to approve care." I'm just the landlord." "We understand, but she's a minor. And she's alone." Charles didn't think. He just moved. By the time he reached the hospital, he was breathless, hair slightly out of place, something that hadn't happened in years. At the reception, he spotted her immediately. Zoe, sitting on a hard plastic bench, alone. Her little backpack clutched to her chest. Her eyes didn't blink when she looked up. "They won't let me in," she said softly. They said I'm too young to be in the ICU alone. Charles stared at her. She looked smaller under the white lights, but her voice still didn't shake. They said I need a responsible adult. And you gave them my number? She nodded once. You own the building. That makes you the one in charge, right? He didn't know what to say. That logic, it made perfect sense in her world. What happened to your mom? She collapsed. I called 911. They said it was pneumonia. Or worse. Charles turned toward the reception. I'll sign whatever you need. She shouldn't be alone. Zoe didn't say thank you, but she walked beside him as the nurse led them through the sterile hallway. Inside the ICU, Elaine was nearly unrecognizable. Tubes, machines, beeping monitors. Her chest moved, but everything else seemed still. Zoe stood frozen just outside the door. Charles reached for her shoulder. She pulled away. I'm not scared, she said. I didn't think you were. But if she stays here long, they'll come. Charles frowned. Who? Social services. She said it like a threat, like a name she'd been warned about her whole life. They came before. When Mom was too sick last time, said I couldn't stay alone, tried to put me in a shelter. She finally looked at him. Her voice dropped. I ran. Charles stepped back, stunned. They almost caught me, she added. But I stayed with Miss Alma till Mom got better. From down the hallway, a voice called out. Zoe Williams? A black woman in a navy blouse and a badge hanging from her lanyard approached with a clipboard. I'm Diana Morris, from Child Protective Services. Can I speak with you? Zoe froze. No, she whispered. Charles stepped in. She's under my supervision, he said without thinking. Diana looked at him. You are? I'm Charles Whitaker. I own the property where she lives. Her mother asked me to take care of her temporarily. Diana didn't blink. Do you have documentation? I can get it. My lawyer can draw something up today. She studied his face, unimpressed. I'll need to follow protocol. This child is vulnerable. We don't allow temporary guardianship without proper vetting. Zoe stepped back toward the wall. Her breath was short. Please, she said, don't take me. Diana paused. Her tone softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. I'm not here to hurt you, but we have to make sure you're safe. Zoe didn't respond. Charles's mind was racing. He couldn't believe what he was doing. He didn't know this girl. He didn't owe this family anything. And yet, give me 24 hours, he said. I'll get everything. Legal. Official. Diana hesitated. 24, she repeated. Then I'll be back. As she walked away, Zoe didn't move. Charles looked down at her. You okay? She nodded, then sat back on the bench. I have work to finish, she mumbled. You're not going back there alone. I didn't say alone. I said I have work. She pulled a small notebook from her bag. Pages of fabric sketches, client names, payment dates. Charles stared. You track your orders? Someone has to. She flipped a page. Mrs. Patterson gave me half in advance, but I still have to finish the last dress by tonight. He sat beside her, unsure if he was impressed or horrified. You're 11. She shrugged. That's old enough. He looked toward the ICU door. The machines hummed. The hallway buzzed with voices. And beside him, a little girl carried more weight than any child should have ever known. Charles didn't sleep that night. He sat at his dining table, laptop open, untouched coffee cold beside him. On the screen was the hospital intake form. Under emergency contact, Zoe had written in crooked block letters, Charles Whitaker, Landlord. He closed the lid slowly. It wasn't just guilt anymore. Something had shifted. The next morning, he picked Zoe up from Miss Alma's shop. The woman was kind, but her voice was sharp when she handed over a sealed bag of dresses. "She's a worker, not a charity case," Alma said. "Treat her with respect." "I'm trying," Charles muttered. Back at his penthouse, Zoe stepped inside like she was entering a museum. The place was glass, steel, and silence. The kind of silence that cost money. "You can pick any room," he offered. She didn't move. "I'll sleep on the couch, closest to the door." "That's not necessary." "I didn't ask if it was," she said quietly. He blinked. Later that evening, he brought her warm food, but she had already pulled out her sewing kit from her backpack. She sat on the living room floor, laying out fabric like she'd done this all her life. Charles watched her from the kitchen. "Don't you want to rest?" he asked. "I have deadlines." "You don't have to finish anything right now." She looked up. "Yes, I do." He started to argue, but stopped. Instead, he sat on the opposite couch, laptop on his knees. He started going through the building files, lease agreements, purchase records, tenant histories. Something was bothering him. Zoe didn't speak again that night, except once. "Don't touch the red thread. It tangles easy." He didn't. Around midnight, he found what he was looking for. The Williams family had been in that building for over 15 years, but there were no official rent increases, no standard late fee notices, and one handwritten note attached to the scanned deed caught his eye. Elaine, tenant since 2008. Agreement made. In-kind work exchange. Repairs plus alterations for reduced rent. Confirmed with owner. He zoomed in on the signature, his father's. Elaine had worked for the company, not just as a tenant, as part of some undocumented, off-the-books deal. He looked at Zoe, still sewing, still focused. Her fingers moved with precision that shouldn't belong to a child. "Your mother did tailoring?" he asked suddenly. Zoe didn't look up. She was a seamstress. Full-time. For who? "The company that owned our building before you." Charles felt something click. "That was my father's firm." Zoe's hands paused, just for a second. Then she kept stitching. She fixed jackets, pants, did uniforms too, I think. Charles leaned forward. Did she ever talk about a contract? Zoe looked up slowly. She said they promised her shares, said everyone who helped build the company would get something. He nodded slowly. "I've heard that story before." "She said when your father died, everything changed. A new woman took over." Charles's stomach turned. "Did she mention a name?" "Victoria." The needle hit fabric hard. "That name's on every memo in my files," he muttered. Zoe stood and walked to her backpack. She pulled out a small spiral notebook, frayed at the edges. "You want to see something?" He nodded. She handed it to him. Inside, names, receipts, payment notes, handwritten timelines, even customer reviews. Each dress she'd sewn had its own line item. But in the back, there were newspaper clippings, old ones. One had a faded photo, his father standing in front of a new development project. Behind him, a younger Elaine, smiling, sewing machine beside her. Charles stared at the image. She kept that? She kept everything, Zoe said. She said, proof matters. He closed the notebook and looked at her. You've been documenting this? Yourself? She nodded. I don't trust people who say they'll remember. He sat back, staring at the ceiling. His father, Victoria, Elaine, secrets scribbled in old notebooks. The power imbalance he'd ignored his entire life was now sitting on his couch, hands stained with thread and truth. For the first time, Charles wasn't looking at Zoe as a child in crisis. She was a survivor, a strategist, and maybe, just maybe, the only one smart enough to take on a system built to ignore her. Charles stood in front of the elevator on the 40th floor of Coleman Estates headquarters, straightening his tie. The chrome doors opened with a soft ding. He stepped into the boardroom. 9 people sat around a glass table. Most were older. All were white. And at the head sat Victoria Reynolds, sharp gray suit, silver earrings, and a smile that never reached her eyes. Charles, she said smoothly, how kind of you to join us. He didn't sit. Not yet. What's this about? He asked. Victoria motioned to a projection screen behind her. Images appeared, photos taken without permission. Him and Zoe walking into social services. Him sitting beside her at the hospital. Victoria's voice softened with practiced concern. We've received complaints, Charles, about your involvement with a minor who has no confirmed relation to you. She's the daughter of one of my tenants, he said flatly. But no legal guardian present, Victoria continued, and you've taken her into your home? A few board members shifted in their seats. Charles didn't flinch. Her mother's in the ICU. I'm sure, Victoria said, but given the company's image, this raises questions about your judgment. He stared at her. You're calling this meeting to question my mental capacity? I'm suggesting we take precautionary measures, she replied. A temporary leave of absence, while we evaluate your current state. He laughed once, short, cold. You don't care about the girl. You're scared of what she knows. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. These are building records from the complex I bought last year. One tenant's name kept popping up. Elaine Williams. Victoria's expression didn't change. She worked for my father, he continued, and apparently had a deal. In-kind service for reduced rent. But nothing was ever formalized. Why? She was compensated, Victoria said. No one ever complained. She didn't get what she was promised. Neither did the others. Because you changed the terms. That's absurd. Charles turned toward the projector and connected his laptop. The first image appeared. A scanned copy of the original shareholder promise. A handwritten memo from William Whitaker himself, guaranteeing early contributors a 1% equity option. Elaine's name was highlighted. The next image, a revised version of the same document. The clause removed. Signature at the bottom. Victoria Reynolds. You altered the agreement, Charles said. You buried the promises my father made, and Elaine was one of the people you cut out. Victoria laughed lightly. Charles, these are decades-old notes. Who even kept them? He clicked again. The third slide appeared. Zoe's notebook. Handwritten timelines. Names. Copies of original memos. Newspaper clippings. And in the center, a photo of Elaine at her sewing machine, dated the same week the first Coleman building opened. The boardroom went silent. That girl has built a stronger case in her school notebook than our legal team has in years, Charles said. Victoria's jaw tightened. I want her gone, she snapped. You're emotionally compromised, Charles. You're not thinking clearly. I'm finally thinking for myself. She's just a child. Charles raised an eyebrow. You think she doesn't know what you did? You're ruining your father's legacy. Number, I'm cleaning it up. He turned back to the board. I'm submitting this evidence to the Department of Justice, the SEC, and the press. And I'm filing a formal motion to audit all contracts issued under Victoria's tenure. You can't be serious. I'm dead serious. Victoria stood. This is all built on scraps collected by a minor. Nothing holds up in court. Want to bet your career on that? The doors opened behind them. Charles's lawyer, Martin, stepped in and handed over a sealed envelope. We've already filed, he said, and I have copies being sent to the City Ethics Committee as we speak. Victoria turned pale. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. He faced the board. My father built this company with the hands of black workers, and Victoria made sure none of them saw a dime of what they were promised. Gasps, murmurs. A few board members leaned forward, whispering to each other. We're not just facing financial risk anymore, Martin added. This is racial discrimination, labor theft, fraud. Victoria grabbed her phone. Martin smiled. Already frozen. Every bank account tied to company operations has been flagged for review. You think this girl wins? Victoria snapped. You'll lose everything. I'd rather lose a title than let you bury another black family's truth. For a moment, no one said a word. Then a quiet voice came from the doorway. It was Zoe. She held her notebook, arms wrapped tight around it. I didn't want revenge, she said. Just honesty. Victoria stared at her like she was seeing her for the first time, and realizing she had underestimated her. We're not invisible, Zoe added. We just know how to sew in silence. That's what scared you. Victoria's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The board was watching her now, and not in admiration. She sat down slowly, her power slipping like dust through fingers. And Zoe? She turned and walked out, back straight, notebook clutched like armor. Victoria's car never left the underground parking garage that day. She sat in the back seat, phone pressed tight to her ear, voice shaking for the first time in 20 years. They have the originals, she whispered. Every document, every signature. That girl found them. On the other end, her lawyer didn't respond for a few seconds. Then, we need to talk strategy. There is no strategy, she hissed. This is war. Meanwhile, the headlines dropped. Scandal at Coleman Estates. Decades of racist exploitation uncovered. Black seamstress promised equity, denied by fraud. Whistleblower is 11-year-old girl with a sewing kit. The story exploded across social media. Zoe's name wasn't in the press yet, but her courage was. Inside the hospital, Elaine Williams was finally awake, weak but alert. Tubes still in her arms, eyes scanning the TV above her bed. She didn't speak at first, just reached out and squeezed Zoe's hand. That promise your father made, she whispered to Charles. I never forgot it. Charles nodded, his voice tight. I'm keeping it now. 3 days later, Victoria Reynolds was forced to resign. Board members voted unanimously after viewing the evidence. One even stood and said aloud, I was there. I remember the whispers. I just never asked. Martin filed the class action paperwork with the DOJ. Dozens of families came forward. Many had passed away, but their names lived on in the pages Zoe had copied into her school notebook. Elaine's signature appeared in the lead complaint. Charles transferred 40% of his own shares into a new legal entity, the Coleman Reparation Fund, set up specifically for the descendants of the original black laborers who helped build Coleman Estates. Zoe sat beside him in the press conference. She wore a plain gray hoodie and held her notebook like it was the Constitution. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. "Is she really the one who uncovered this?" Charles leaned into the mic. "She didn't uncover it. She preserved it. She protected what my father erased, and what we all ignored." "What happens to Victoria Reynolds?" someone shouted. "That's up to the courts," he replied. But behind the scenes, it was already underway. Emails from the 90s resurfaced. Victoria's digital signature linked to altered contracts. Her conversations with former legal aides showed direct intent to defraud. She was indicted on multiple counts: fraud, racial discrimination in business, obstruction of justice. Martin stood by Charles in the Attorney General's office when the charges were formally filed. Zoe didn't go. She had more important things to do. At a small table in Charles's penthouse, she sat with her sewing machine, the same one she'd dragged out of the apartment. Same bent pedal, same chipped thread plate. But this time, the light above her didn't flicker. This time, the fabric wasn't for rent money. It was for uniforms. The first official project from the newly formed Elaine Stitch Academy, a non-profit school for young black girls interested in fashion, design, and business. Fully funded by the Coleman Reparation Fund. When a reporter visited, Zoe didn't talk about justice or revenge. She just said, "I like making things. I like when they last." Meanwhile, Victoria was denied bail. The courtroom was quiet as the federal judge listed the charges, and in the front row, Elaine sat with a cane, Zoe beside her, notebook in her lap. Victoria glanced their way only once. Zoe didn't blink. She'd already won, and the world finally knew it. Fall came early that year. The air in Boston turned sharp, and the trees outside the hospital shifted into fire-colored silence. Elaine Williams walked slowly, cane in one hand, Charles steadying her with the other. Zoe walked beside them, holding nothing but her mother's sketchbook, the same notebook that had changed everything. Charles opened the glass door to the new building, a place that used to be an old Coleman warehouse. Now it had a new sign above the entrance: Williams Design Institute, powered by Coleman Reparation Fund. Inside, fabric hung from racks like flags of resistance. Students moved between sewing tables, pinboards, design screens, black girls, brown girls, some barely teenagers, all creating. A younger instructor adjusted a hemline. Zoe watched quietly, hands behind her back. She didn't speak unless spoken to, still wore her hoodies, still carried her notebook. But now, when she entered a room, people looked up. Not out of pity, but out of respect. Elaine took a seat in the corner office, a room she'd once cleaned for someone else decades ago. On the desk sat an old, sealed box. Charles had found it deep in the archives. He opened it gently. Dozens of sketches, yellowed with age. Each one signed, Elaine W. Designs for uniforms the company had used for years without credit. Ones she'd made, drawn, perfected, but never claimed. Elaine ran her fingers along the edges of the pages. "I thought he forgot," she whispered. Charles swallowed hard. He didn't forget. He just chose silence. Zoe chose to speak, Elaine said. She looked toward her daughter, who was guiding a younger girl through a sewing technique. Zoe pointed with a pencil, calm and steady, the same way she used to guide fabric under the needle. She's better than both of us, Elaine added. She's everything we failed to be, Charles replied. They didn't say much else. Later that night, Charles joined them for dinner at their apartment, a smaller space, but warm, full of books and colored thread and sketches taped to the fridge. No luxury, just life. Zoe sat at the window, notebook open, staring at the skyline. You ever wonder what would have happened if I never opened the door that day? She asked. Charles nodded slowly. All the time. I wasn't scared of you, she said. I was scared of being seen. Because once someone sees you, you can't hide anymore. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I used to think seeing was enough. Now I know. Doing something about it is what matters. Zoe turned the page and sketched a sleeve. Clean lines, sharp shoulders, confidence sewn into every curve. Do you ever miss who you were before this? She asked. He thought about it. The boardrooms, the suits, the silence. No, he said. But I do regret how long it took me to meet you. She looked up. That's not your biggest mistake, she replied. Oh? She smiled, just a little. You let me redesign the school uniforms, which means I get to pick the colors. He laughed, louder than he had in weeks. Please tell me they're not purple. Hot pink, actually. He groaned. She grinned. Outside, the city moved on, quietly, slowly. But it moved. And somewhere in that motion, 3 lives, once separated by power, race, and silence, had finally stitched themselves back together. Zoe closed the notebook, her voice soft. But this time, I'm sewing for the future, not just for survival.